So, okay. Welcome everyone that's just joined. I can see there's a lot of interest in this topic and people are still joining, but I think we'll kick the webinar off now. It's 2 minutes past 10 in the UK. The agenda for the webinar today, I'll do a short introduction and then the bulk of the presentation will be led by my colleagues Neil and Alex, focusing on C&I Energy as a service. What is the opportunity and how to capture it? So today we'll be focusing on looking at the business model, the market sizing work that we've done, and the strategies and success factors that we've identified through the work that we've done. I should say this is all part of our new energy business model research service. So if you're a subscriber to that service, you have full access to the subscriber report. This is a public webinar, so what we're sharing today are some of the key takeaways and findings, but we're not sharing the detailed quantification, the numbers from the subscriber report. So please refer to the subscriber website if you have access, and if you'd like to get access, then obviously contact any of the team today. So I'm Andy Bradley on the right hand side, and perhaps I just let Neil and Alex to say hello to the audience.
Good morning everybody.
Hello.
So I'm Andy, I'm based in our Edinburgh office, Neil is based in our London office, and Alex is based in our Paris office, although of course we're all working from home, as I'm sure most of you are as well. So just a brief introduction for those that aren't familiar with DeltaE. You know, as a research consulting company, we're very focused on the energy transition, and really that's the key, the core of our business. We don't do anything else, and I've just tried to capture on this slide to characterize, you know, the shift, the transition that's happening from the old energy world to the new energy world, and I'm sure these themes will be familiar with many people in the audience this morning. But that transition is obviously creating a range of new needs for all types of company. You know, the need to understand how the energy system is transforming, the need to understand end users and how their needs are changing, the need to develop new propositions to remain relevant through the transition, and of course the need to develop new business models, shifting away from commodity to service-based models that many companies are doing. And really this summarizes the reason why DeltaE exists. I mean, our focus is really helping our customers understand these challenges and opportunities and find the compelling answers to them. So our breadth of coverage as a business, you know, spans the energy transition, ranging from flexibility energy storage through distributed power, local energy networks. We do a lot of work around heat, electrification of heat, new heat technologies, looking at microgrids, community energy systems, for example, and electric vehicles, the electric vehicle charging infrastructure that's developing. We're doing a lot of new work as well on hydrogen, which I'm sure is a familiar topic with many in the audience today. And then at the top of the chart there, you can see that we do a lot of work around the business models associated with all those technologies. So that's really focusing on what's outside of the box rather than what's inside the box. And today we'll be drawing on that research theme. And just briefly on the business model research that we do, you know, these are the things that we're enabling our subscribers to do. So through this business model research service, we're looking to get under the skin of innovative business models, you know, really detailed analysis of what's getting traction with customers, helping our subscribers identify the smarter plays, sizing the market growth and the revenue opportunity, ultimately to support assessments of value, and we hope inspire our subscribers and enable them to learn from the market, both successes and failures. So really those are the jobs that we're trying to do for our subscribers through this research. And today, this morning, we'll be talking to you about a recent report that we did under this service focusing on C&I Energy as a service. So just enough of an introduction from me. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to Neil to start going through the main part of the presentation. Neil.
Great, thank you, Andy. Morning, everybody. So I think if you flip on to the next slide for me, Andy. In terms of the structure of the presentation today, I'll be taking you through a bit of the context and explaining what we mean at DeltaE by C&I Energy as a service. Alex will then take you through some of our market sizing numbers and our outlooks in the various markets, and then I'll finish us off by talking through some of the strategies that we identified through our research. So as Andy said, this is based on research that we completed earlier this year, towards the end of last year, looking at Europe predominantly, but also further afield in North America and elsewhere at the market for energy as a service for commercial and industrial customers. So to start things off, you can see on the slide here, we've provided our own definition of C&I Energy as a service. I think it's fair to say that it's become a little bit of a buzz phrase in the industry, and well, that's evidenced by the great attendance that we've got here today. It's clearly attracts a lot of attention, but I also think it's fair to say that it's not tightly defined, and people use the term differently. So on the screen here, you can see how we define it, and there's really two key features that we look for in full service energy as a service. So the first one is it's a bundle of measures to improve the energy performance for a commercial or industrial or even public customer. So that would include energy demand solutions, things like lighting replacements, HVAC systems, insulation, energy generation solutions, so things like solar PV, maybe CHP, battery storage, got EV charging in there as well. And combining those with ongoing services, so maintenance, optimization services, installation, things like that. Now, the second key feature, which really makes energy as a service different from your traditional energy solutions, is the fact that it's financed off balance sheet, paid for via the customer's operating expenditure budget, and usually tied to some kind of performance or guaranteed outcome. So if you go on to the next slide.
Neil, there's a question that we received regarding the financing aspect of energy as a service. I think it has a simple answer, but it might be worth just clarifying. You know, do all energy as a service providers need to offer financing?
Yeah, so the simple answer to that is yes, they do. Otherwise, it wouldn't be, certainly under our definition, energy as a service. But as we'll go on to see on the next slide, there are definite variations in the type of financing, the level of financing provided, and so in that sense, it may be that providers will call something energy as a service without providing financing, or quite often it's the case they will use a third party to provide finance, in which case it could still be an energy as a service model. But in general, yes, it would be to fit with our definition.
Okay, thanks.
So as you can see, actually on this slide, quite related, there isn't a huge array of what we term full service energy as a service offerings in the market at the moment, but there is quite a complicated number of variations on energy as a service offered, and these are offered by different companies. They're used in different countries, and they often go by different names, many of which might mean similar things. So we've tried to kind of cut through that complexity by plotting it, the variations along two different axes. You can see on the right of the screen here. So along the x-axis, you've got the different types of contracts. So ranging on the left there from, well, not really energy as a service at all, but on balance sheet, the customer pays the full capital cost of the solution. Through the middle, where you've got more sort of asset leasing models, and towards the right, where you've got your OPEX, off-balance sheet models, which we term more as a service. So there's a range of different types of contracts, different types of financing that we see in the market. And then similarly, on the y-axis there, you've got the technology scope. So we see providers offering single technology solutions, and some of these might be fully off balance sheet, so things like heat as a service or solar PPAs, I think would fit in the bottom right of the 2x2 there. Heading up the y-axis, you've got specialists in energy efficiency measures, so they only really provide demand side measures, but they might provide these completely off balance sheet if through energy performance contracting. And similarly, you have providers who specialize in supply side solutions, so that things like energy supply contracting. And then going to the top of the y-axis there, you've got multiple technology solutions. So providers who will provide the full range of demand side, supply side, and ongoing services. And when these are combined with your off balance sheet solution, that's when you get to what I described on the previous slide, that the full service energy as a service. And there's a whole host of different names being used in the market to describe business models of that kind. So if you just go on to the next slide, this slide really just shows the interest in this area from some of Europe's largest energy companies. So we see a lot of acquisition and investment activity being targeted across the value chain for energy as a service. So along the top there, you can see how we've laid out a simplified version of the value chain for energy as a service. So a lot of activity around, in particular, designing these solutions and project managing them. So the likes of Centrica, Engie, EDF have all made acquisitions of companies who specialize in providing those services, and probably even more activity in the technology manufacture and distribution element of the value chain. So this is companies acquiring maybe aggregators or EV charging companies, solar specialists, and looking to integrate these into a wider energy as a service offering, which they can then offer to their customers. And some examples as well of companies acquiring on-site solution specialists, so engineering consultancies and installation companies. But I suppose the key point here is that there's a lot of interest in this space, and big energy companies in Europe are using M&A to position themselves strongly in this market. It's not just limited to energy companies though, and really what this slide shows is that there's a rich mix of other companies also active in this space. So that ranges from smaller utilities through to construction and engineering companies, facilities management companies, ESCOs as well. Of course, there's a lot of similarity between the ESCO and the energy as a service business model, and really that's a tiny snapshot on the right there of different players who may be active right across the value chain, or some of which will specialize in particular areas. So there you can see circled some solar specialists who do solar PPA type deals for commercial and industrial customers.
Now, there's a question about the role of ESCOs in energy as a service. I'm sure there are actually many people who are wondering about where ESCOs fit in. You've got them on the slide here. I mean, what's your view as to how big a role ESCOs will play in this?
I can probably take this question, Andy. It's a very good question, because the distinction between ESCO and energy as a service can be quite blurry. I think the key distinction is the fact that energy as a service is off-balance sheet financing models. And from what we have seen in France or the UK, which are very well-established ESCO markets, ESCOs are actually willing as well to shift towards these off-balance sheet models. So for instance, Engie has been focusing a lot on energy as a service at the moment in France. I really think that ESCO see the benefits also of managing integrated contracts covering both the supply side and the energy use, as Neil explained before. So they're getting pretty engaged in this landscape for sure.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Shall I move to the next slide?
Absolutely. Thank you. So the energy services markets actually tend to follow a linear journey, as we illustrated in the left of the slides. So it starts as traditional markets before moving to a more growth markets, established markets. So in this more traditional market, we see more of ESCO type activities, actually, more traditional services, less integrated contracts, often contracts focus on only one technology. And then progressively, these markets shift towards growth markets. And we see several drivers that are pushing markets in this direction. So for example, there's the fact that corporate social responsibility is becoming increasingly important in Europe. The fact that organizations are cash strapped. There are a few regulations that are pushing the markets, such as carbon targets. And also the fact that the energy world is increasingly complex. I think it's important to note as well that bypassing is very unlikely on this market because it takes time to build consumer awareness and trust in energy as a service. So on the right of this slide, it's a snapshot of our market sizing for Europe. So we tried to estimate the size of energy services sold in Europe. And I think the big takeaway here is that Germany is probably the most advanced energy services market in Europe. But Sweden and the UK are also quite important.
Okay, thanks, Alex. There's a couple of questions come in actually that might just take at this point. There's, I think, quite a simple one, clarification. Yeah, are the offerings we're talking about here B2B or also B2C?
Oh, we're only focusing on C&I, so it's B2B, and in some cases B2G as well. We're also including the public sector here. Yeah,
okay, so it's very much B2B or B2G, so we're not focusing on B2C in this analysis.
Not at all.
And there's you mentioned Engie on the previous slide, and there's some good questions actually that we probably don't know the answers to, but around Engie keeping its involvement in this activity. You know, they made some big strategy announcements recently about divestments. So do you have any feeling on Engie's future commitment to this type of activity?
I think it's a very good question, Andy, and I cannot answer very precisely. It's true that Engie is trying to leave the energy services space in some areas, but also keeping some of its business operational. I couldn't be more precise than this. I think we'll know more in the coming months as well.
Yeah. Okay. No, agreed. Okay, agreed. So it's a good question, and it's one to watch over the rest of this year into next year, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. Shall I move on to the next slide?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So this is again our forecast on market sizing in Europe, but this time not looking at specific countries, but more technologies. And I think it's worth to mention here that, as you can see, energy as a service is not really a tipping market, but more an evolutionary one. There's no silver bullet here. But however, it's a very interesting market because it shows steady growth and there is a very large volume of projects procured in Europe. So we try to classify a little bit the different technologies that we saw appearing in projects. And HVAC and building management system, for instance, are already quite established, but we see them as being more and more integrated in bigger contracts, often bundled with other technology, and that's quite interesting. And on the other hand, for example, we see demand-side response being in decline because there is a high level of competition, which is driving costs down. So a few takeaways here, but overall, we have to keep in mind that the country context influences a lot the uptake of these different technologies. I think one key example here is CHPs, which will continue to grow in the UK, for instance, but less so in other countries.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Can I ask a question about COVID-19? And yeah, sorry to bring that up into this webinar, but a kind of question around the impact of the pandemic on this market. Is it broadly positive, or has it disrupted it in any way? What's your view on this forecast? Yeah, in the light of what's happened with the pandemic over the last months?
Well, I think COVID can have both a positive and a negative effect. So in terms of positive, obviously the internal rate of return, the green stimulus, the fact that companies are more cash trapped are probably going to push the market for energy as a service. But on the other hand, there are some barriers as well. So for example, the fact that people are working more and more from home, so there is less incentive to take energy as a service for offices, for instance. So a lot of incentives here, but overall, I would say that so far what we've seen is that the impact of COVID was largely positive on the market.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Yeah, so the kind of the tailwinds have probably picked up more than the headwinds from the crisis.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Shall I go on to the next slide?
Yes, please. So we looked also a little bit at the typical customers for energy as a service. So as we mentioned just before, it's business and public sector only. So this graph is actually split in terms of value, because actually what we see is that in terms of number of contracts, the energy as a service market is actually driven by public sector procurements, so councils, university, healthcare. And the reason for that is that the public segment so far agrees more to have longer contract lengths. I also think that the big trend around smart cities, net zero city is driving the number of projects up a little bit. But in terms of higher value per contract, the industrial and commercial segment is definitely leading. And I think it's mainly driven by their need to cut on their cost. And also, as I just mentioned, the fact that the corporate social responsibility is really increasing in this sector. We've seen it in the news a lot recently. In terms of future outlook, we don't really see this picture changing a lot in the coming years, mainly because it's a very established market with a lot of contracts. The public sector could grow a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but overall, the market structure doesn't change drastically over the next few years, you think?
No. It's
okay.
quite stable.
Okay, understood. There's a couple of questions actually, Alex, I might just pick up now, relating back to the previous slide, actually. Question from Valerie. Thank you, Valerie, for the question. In terms of the technology side, we don't mention hydrogen, which I think is quite a good question. I think there's quite an obvious answer why we don't mention it, but perhaps Neil or Alex, you might like to comment on that.
Absolutely, we actually do mention it, but it's quite small. It's the little orange bit on the top of the bar chart.
So, I see, yes, it's the one right at the very top of the stack, but it's absolutely tiny, yeah. Okay.
Absolutely, because the fact is that H2 is the big trend right now in Europe, I think, but there's a clear lack of business models around that. We don't really see how it's going to play a role in energy services, especially in the C&I sector. So obviously it could grow a lot in the coming years, but I think we're only looking 5 years ahead and it's quite a short amount of time.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Alex. There's another question actually related to this slide as well about BEMS. Can we give a definition of what we mean by BEMS?
Yeah, absolutely. So it means building energy management systems. And those systems enable the monitoring and the optimization of energy flows within a building. Mm-hmm. So it's a quite useful way to reduce the amount of energy that is used within a building. Just requires the addition of little sensors and automatic switches and some kind of intelligence in the building.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Alex. Alexis, I hope that answers your question, but please contact me if it doesn't. Some of you have asked actually about why the units aren't there on the y-axis. I mean, this just to make clear that actually we've drawn this from the subscriber report. So if you're a subscribing company, you will have access to the full report and all the data and the numbers associated with it. As this is a public webinar, we've redacted some of the data. Obviously, we'd be delighted for companies to talk to us and become subscribers to this research, but that's the explanation for those wondering why there isn't a y-axis scale on some of the charts. Okay, thank you, Alex. So just moving on to then this slide.
I'll pass it on to Neil.
Okay.
Great, thanks, Alex. So I think it'd be fair to say that the energy as a service model is quite a big change for customers. And right now, as a result of that, we would really characterize it as more of a push market than a market with lots of pull and demand from customers. And the reasons for that is largely down to several sort of key customer concerns, which you can see on screen there. So I'll just pick them off one by one and explain them briefly. So sole supplier risk, and this really relates to the idea of asking a single company or a single joint venture or companies partnering together to provide an entire solution for your heat, for your light, power, carbon compliance, and so on. It introduces an enormous dependency on a single supplier, and that's quite unnatural, I think, for many businesses, and can result in some pushback from customers. Information risk, so that relates to the fact that with many of these energy as a service type deals, the full cost and scope of work can't actually be fully assessed by a customer until after the contract's been awarded, or at least until after a lot of metering's been installed and a lot of cost has potentially already been sunk into the project. And that makes it really quite difficult to actually compare suppliers and different offerings from suppliers. Related to that as well, there's a bit of an element of the service providers have a vested interest in providing themselves with glowing performance reports. And so there's a whole kind of subsector within this area around measurement and verification of these projects, but we still see it being quite common that suppliers will do the measurement and verification themselves. And so there's a sort of an information imbalance there between the customer and supplier, and its potential. We've heard stories of customers being misled. So that's another concern of customers. The opportunity cost risk. So energy as a service has this zero capital requirement for customers. And for some, we've heard that this just sounds almost too good to be true. So it's a guaranteed reduction in their costs for no capital outlay in many cases. And I think that can lead to some of them to actually doubt, well, first of all, whether or not that's true, but also whether or not it's an opportunity that they should actually just be taking advantage of themselves. And so there's a bit of an element of this is too good to be true. Are we missing something here? Career risk. So this was a really repeated theme from talking to energy as a service providers. And it's around the idea that, you know, the different stakeholders you need to speak to. So whether that be facilities managers, energy managers, finance managers, a whole host of them, they might feel like they're taking a bit of a career risk by recommending this brand new shiny solution to their CFO. I think the current state of play, it'd be fair to say, for most customers is fix on fail. So when your heating breaks down, you replace it, and it's pretty natural for them to stump up the capital to do that. Whereas energy as a service kind of takes the opposite approach and encourages you to proactively replace and upgrade and optimize your energy systems. And that's a very different thing for customers to have to do. And so some see it as a bit of a career risk just to recommend that to a CFO without knowing fully how it's going to work. And then related to that is this idea of an unproven solution risk. So we heard that customers can be concerned that this is such a new area. There's not that many sort of flagship companies that have implemented big energy as a service contracts, and that may make some customers wonder why that's the case. For us, we think it's just a matter of time, and we do see increasingly big blue chip customers looking to sign up to these sorts of deals, and we think that could be a real catalyst for the market and turn it into more of a pull market than a push market. But those are some of the key customer concerns that we see, which is sort of creates this idea of energy as a service as a push market right now.
Okay.
And then the final slide that we wanted to present covers the 5 key strategies that we've identified in the energy as a service market. And there's quite a range on screen there, and I think we've got time to go through them all, but they range from your sort of big blue chip players like ENGIE and EDF and Centrica and so on, who are really looking to provide the entire package to their customers, and through to companies that specialize in perhaps a specific technology, so solar, or a specific element of the value chain, so maybe they're specialist financiers, or they'll specialize in a particular customer type, so they might target the public and government sector specifically. Perhaps one area that we see some innovation and we think is quite different is actually the 5th strategy you can see on screen there, and this is companies looking to use energy as a service as a platform for use cases beyond just energy, so providing customers with energy as a service, but using that to provide them with more functionally rich offers. So one example, and this is not a common strategy that we see at the minute, but one example is actually a US company called EaaS Technology. So they've taken this approach. And EaaS' view is that energy, for many companies, for some it is of course, but for many it's not a key concern. And so providers of energy related technology should actually be concentrating on adding value in other ways. So, for example, improving well-being for staff and site users, or boosting productivity of staff and operational performance. So EaaS use power over Ethernet technology, which essentially can make buildings intelligent and connect them together, and then they'll build sector-specific solutions on top of that beyond just energy management use cases. So an example might be in a care home. You can use the power of Ethernet technology to help staff monitor residents' behavior via Bluetooth tagging. Or another one, a COVID-related one, might be automated UV disinfection for empty offices to help keep them COVID secure in today's world. So for EaaS, energy as a service and energy management is a way into the customer, but then they'll layer on additional value for customers afterwards. But as I said, this is a sort of quite a new area. It's quite innovative, but it's not common right now. But we do think it could provide more attractive propositions for customers in future.
Okay,
and
thanks,
then if
Neil.
we just go on to the final slide, really just wanting to summarize some of the key takeaways from today. So first off, we described the key features of C&I Energy as a service. So it's a bundle of energy measures, demand, supply, and ongoing services. And these are financed off balance sheets with payments generally tied to some sort of performance or outcome. We've then shown how this is already a large market, but it does have solid growth prospects. There's some specific technologies that we see growing quicker than others, but in general, we see this market and demand for this kind of solution growing over the next 5 years, and we think it's a really interesting market to be involved in. And then we finished off by explaining some of the challenges and customer concerns to the uptake of this business model, as well as the strategies being implemented by the service providers in the market today. So I think that's all the information we wanted to present. Andy, I'll maybe pass back over to you and we can have a look at, I think we've got a poll and perhaps some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've got a few good questions. Certainly a couple of them I'd like to come back to. So we'll do that for the next few minutes. But just as we're doing that, I just sort of get this up on the screen. So this is for everyone to be aware of. On the left-hand side there, you see some recent reports that we've released under the business model service. And on the right-hand side, you see 5 topics that we've picked up from our subscribers and from the industry as being potentially interesting for us to examine in future work over 2021. So I set up a poll, so I'd be very interested in people's thoughts on that list of topics on the right hand side. So I'll give you the opportunity now to hopefully tell us which of those topics you would like to participate or be most interested in. So can you see the poll on your screen now, Neil?
We can see it.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so I don't see it on my screen. So I'll just put that up on the screen. So please, you can tick more than one box, but we're really interested to find out what future topics, what future research people will find most interesting. But while we're doing that, there's a couple of questions I'd like to come back to. Thanks everyone for your questions. There's one question here from Gudrun on do you have any insights, indications on the profitability of the service portfolio? You know, are, in brackets, are services viable standalone, or are they rather enablers for legacy businesses? So is energy as a service something that actually companies are doing to create opportunities to sell more kit, more of what they've done in their legacy business? Or are the service propositions more profitable businesses to be in for them to grow their activity in? Do you have any perspective or thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't think there's not a straightforward answer, and I think it depends a bit on the country. it also depends a lot on the technology too. So some technologies, things like lighting, have a very predictable and quick payback if you're upgrading to LED lighting, and they can be very profitable projects to take on, or at least very risk-free projects. It just depends how much you charge the customers ultimately. So increasingly, we do see service providers trying to bundle technologies together and to try and almost offset perhaps technologies that might have a longer payback period. So thinking things like energy storage perhaps, although I know that the payback periods are coming down for that, alongside things like lighting upgrades, heating upgrades, which can have more predictable payback periods. In terms of companies trying to sell their own products, that's definitely, I mean, that's one of the strategies that we found. So companies like Schneider and Philips, so Philips with their lighting as a service business, are definitely using energy as a service as a way to sell more of their own kit. I don't think that these are the biggest parts of their business by any stretch. I still think they make more of their money, certainly Philips, from selling kit. But and in terms of sort of overall profitability of the two models, I'm not entirely sure which is more profitable, but there's clearly a lot of benefits to developing these more service-based business models with ongoing customer relationships, where you can create sort of a base level of revenue each year on an ongoing basis, rather than starting from scratch as they do with their product business. So there's other benefits beyond just pure profit margin at play as well for these players as a motivation to get involved in as a service.
I agree. I think it's a really good question for the energy transition, and I think fundamentally all businesses in the energy transition, it's one strategic option, is to develop new activities that lever or enable the core business, but ultimately the new activities may become the core business of the company in 20, 10, 20, 25 years time. So I think it's a really interesting strategic question actually for all companies engaged in the energy transition. And there was another question about contract lengths actually, or sorry, apart from contract length, do you see much variation in energy as a service models depending on the end user? You know, difference, for example, between commercial versus public sector versus industrial. So I don't know, Alex or Neil, one of you would like to pick that up. You know, do the models change significantly between the different types of end customer, end user?
It's a good question. Go on, Alex.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I would say yes, they do change, but they change between commercial and industrial customers too. I mean, we looked at this market and we segmented it between C&I and public, but I think that the end we could be much more precise and look at, for example, the retail versus an hospital versus offices, and the type of buildings and the type of installation is going to define a lot the type of contract and the type of offers. But overall, I would say that when we look at the public sector, we see a lot more of energy performance contract type with some guaranteed performance, maybe more than in the C&I private sector.
Okay. Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think, I mean, it definitely does vary between sector. Each customer sector has its own unique challenges and own energy profiles as well, and that will definitely dictate which technologies are more or less applicable to them. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. And there's perhaps I'm conscious of time here. Thank you everyone for the questions, and we'll come back to you individually. I think on several points we won't have time to address, but perhaps a final one to take, a more positive one. You talked a lot about the barriers and the risks, Neil. What are the main motivators for customers, do you think? What's going to excite customers about these types of proposition and make them, if you like, create market pull on the supplier push?
So I think there's quite a few potentially for drivers, for customers to take on these kinds of models. Probably the biggest one is around shifting risk related to energy consumption away from customers and onto service providers. So risks around financing, credit risk, around technology, and the technical risks involved, performance of assets, operating them, the energy price risks as well can also be absorbed by the service providers. And that's a real headache for a lot of customers, and most of them don't have that expertise in-house, or if they do, it can be quite expensive expertise to have in-house. And so being able to have all of that taken off their plate and put on to a service provider that specializes in exactly that in return for a fixed or fairly predictable fee is really a potentially very appealing model for customers to sign up to. And then I think beyond that, there's of course other more generic drivers of this model for customers. So things around corporate social responsibility and an increased appetite from customers to be energy efficient and to show to their customers that they are energy efficient. And also, which we've already mentioned, I suppose, in relation to COVID-19, but cash-strapped organizations, so organizations not having or not wanting to outlay lots of capital on non-core business activities. So this is a good way to avoid having to do that. And then you can couple that with sort of increasing regulation and incentives, which are driving this kind of activity.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, how big a thing do you think net zero might be for many end users, you know, making commitments and needing vendors to provide them with net zero solutions?
Well, I mean, hopefully, certainly if they mean it when they say it, then it absolutely should be a big driver of this kind of thing. Yeah. Because there's been some pretty bold dates set by some organisations, and they're either going to have to hire a lot of people who know how to do it, or hire a service provider to help them.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Neil. Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you everyone for your questions and participation. I've answered some of the questions directly during the call, but we've taken some of them during the webinar, but there's a few that I haven't managed to answer, trying to multitask, do all these things at once. I haven't been able to do them all in the webinar, but I'll certainly try and come back to people individually if I haven't responded already. But I'd like to draw the webinar to a close now. We've just gone over 40 minutes, so that's the kind of length that we find works best. Thank you everyone for your participation. I hope you found that interesting. Always open to your feedback and comments. Thank you for your feedback on the list of topics there. For those that are interested, the most popular topic was the platform ecosystem topic, which came out at 57%. Of the audience was interested in that, and the least interesting was future prospects for home services, which may reflect the nature of the audience, I guess, to some extent for this B2B C&I Energy as a Service topic. But thank you everyone for your participation. I hope you found it interesting. Feel free to reach out to myself, Andy, or Neil and Alex. I'd be very happy to take your questions and feedback and talk with you in future. So thank you everyone, and have a nice day.